Hi, my name is Jessica Horton. I'm with the Forest Hills Foundation for Education, and this is a presentation about how to write an award-winning grant for the foundation. So if you've come to our website to apply for a grant, congratulations, you've come to the right place. And our grants can be used to fund new teacher projects and materials, curriculum, programming, or different professional growth opportunities. Really, the sky is the limit on what you can apply for. We would ask that you learn a little bit about our organization before you apply, and you can find out more about our organization at FHFE.org. So I like to start by talking about how lesson plans and grants are similar. I find this to be an accessible way for teachers to understand what a grant application might look like. Just like a lesson plan, grants are going to have objectives or goals. There's going to be a methods section, and there will be some type of assessment. Your lesson plans might be connected to some sort of national, state, or district criteria, whereas a grant is going to be connecting to some sort of organizational criteria, and that's going to be our mission or our vision. Grants also include a discussion of a need and what you project outcomes will be related to your grant. You'll also have a budget that you will design, and you'll talk about how you'll be able to sustain your grant past the initial award. Before we look at the application though, I'd like to start with an overarching look at what is this big idea. Well, a good quality grant application should have a very clear project idea, and it should be supported with some sort of existing research or founded in best practice. We really are looking for projects that have clearly defined objectives and well-designed methods, and you have thoughtfully looked at how to measure the impact on students. It might be helpful to start by thinking about what your idea is and evaluating your idea using these 4 questions. On the left side of the screen, the first 2 questions say, can you accomplish your instructional goals without being funded? Or can those materials already be reasonably obtained through your school, PTA, support, etc.? On the right side of the screen, can you reuse those materials with other students, or will having those materials move instruction forward rather than simply fill a void of classroom supplies and manipulatives? If you answered yes to the first 2 questions, or no to the second 2 questions, that idea might not be the best for a grant application. We're really looking for grant applications where you've demonstrated a real need for those materials or experiences. And if you can already accomplish the same instructional goals without actually awarding money, then there's really no need for us to fund. We're also really looking for grants that are innovative, raise the educational bar, and demonstrate forward thinking. So if this is really just the same program rehashed and it's already been done before, that doesn't really meet the criteria of innovative. You should also note that grants that have a broader long-term impact or can reach a larger group of students or a larger group later are going to be more appealing to us to fund than grants that are really focused on a very small number of students or a really short period of time. Okay, so now we're going to take a look at the application. You might want to have some paper and pencil next to you because there will be some moments to be able to pause throughout the presentation and for you to be able to jot down your ideas and really start the application. We are going to go through the application section by section and look at each criteria point that we have, and then you're going to have some time throughout this presentation to be able to write to that part of the application. Before we start though, I want to point out 3 important things. Really, you want to think of this as a persuasive writing assignment. We're really looking to convince and persuade the grant reviewers that your grant is needed. We really need to fund this for students. So we want to be excited as we're reading about your grant. Also, try to avoid using any sort of specialized education terminology. Even though we have educators who are reviewing the applications, every good grant is accessible. We may not be familiar with acronyms or with specialized terms, so please avoid using the jargon in your application, or if you do use it, then please explain it thoroughly in your application. And finally, be succinctly detailed. I know that sounds sort of contradictory in nature, but what we mean by that is add as much detail as you can in as little of a space as possible. Remember, we're reading tons of applications, and so we want to get excited, but be able to fully understand and have a clear picture in our head. Okay, so there are 9 sections to the application for the Forest Hills Foundation for Education grant. The first section is project goals and objectives. The second section is implementation, which is sort of like the methods section. The third section is on innovation. The fourth section is on potential impact. The fifth section is connection to the Forest Hills Foundation vision. The sixth section is on expected outcomes. The seventh section is on assessments. The eighth section is on sustainability. And the ninth section is on project budget. And you'll notice there's a star next to innovation and connection to the Forest Hills Foundation for Education vision. That's because these 2 sections of the application are actually more heavily weighted than the other sections of the application. So you really want to pay close attention to those sections. So now we're going to go section by section, and we're going to talk about what that section is really asking for. We're going to look at some examples of well-written goals and objectives, whereas not so well-written goals and objectives, so you can kind of have an idea of what something we might be looking to fund looks like. And we're going to give you some time to actually write out in each section. So for the project goals and objectives section, just like a lesson plan, grant goals and objectives should be clearly defined and measurable. What we're looking to know is, what are students going to learn or gain from this project? And remember, ultimately, we're looking to have an impact on students. So if your objectives can't be measured, we're never going to know whether or not that grant money actually had an impact on students. In the application itself, this is the language you will see. It says, clearly articulate the purpose, goals, and objectives of the project. So now let's take a look at a not so ideal response. This grant was written for an outdoor classroom, the funding of building an outdoor classroom, and this was the objective statement. It says, if this grant is funded, it will provide us with the materials to build an outdoor classroom. The objective of this grant is to create an outdoor classroom to help kids with anxiety and ADHD. So as a reviewer, when I read that, I'm thinking to myself, well, what does that mean, help? How exactly can I measure what it means to help? Let's look at a better example now. So you might want to take a minute to pause the video so that you can read this particular response. You'll note that this writer included some research to back up their ideas and describes more clearly what the objectives of this project are. So take a minute to pause the video and read. You'll notice in the last frame, the writer well articulated the objectives and really laid the groundwork for how those objectives will be assessed. So now you're going to take a few minutes to pause the video and work on your goals and objectives section. Make sure that your objectives describe how students are going to be impacted and are really written in a way that is measurable. The phrase that you're going to be writing to is clearly articulate the purpose, goals, and objectives of this project. And you can resume the video as soon as you are finished writing. For section 2, we are going to work on the methods section of the grant, the implementation section. So a methods section is just like the procedure of a lesson plan, and it should be able to provide us with a clear picture of what you and your students are going to be doing as you work towards those objectives. And again, remember that what we're ultimately looking for is whether or not this award money is having an impact on students. So if we can't visualize what the students are going to be doing during the project, then it's going to be hard for us to know eventually what our impact is going to be. Section 2 of the grant application reads, describe the plan methods and how they are founded in best practices. So here's a less than ideal response. This says, when we obtain the grant materials, we will work together to build and use the outdoor classroom. The garden part of the outdoor classroom will be used to grow a variety of vegetables and flowers. Students will enjoy spending time building the garden and eating the vegetables that we grow there. I will let my students have a choice in which vegetables we plant in our garden because providing students with choice is important. We will also use the benches and podium to work outside when the weather is nice. Now, although this method section does create an image in the mind of the reviewers, I'm still not entirely clear about this plan. So how are we really going to be using the award to accomplish the objective? And can more detail be added here? So now we're going to show you a response over the next 3 frames that we consider to be a more ideal response. So you might want to pause the video and read the first frame and then move on to the second and third to get an idea of what a really well-crafted method section will look like. Here's the second frame, and here's the third frame. And I just want to point out that it's really not about the length of the implementation section. It's really about whether or not the reviewers get a very, very clear picture of what's going to be taking place during the project and how that award money is going to be used. So now it's your turn to work on the implementation section of your grant application. Again, the phrase that you're writing to is describe the plan methods and how they are founded in best practice. And remember, this is that opportunity to be succinctly detailed, create a very strong image in our heads about what you are going to be doing during this project with your students. So you can pause the video here now and work on the implementation section of your grant. So now we're going to work on section 3 of the grant application, the section on innovation. I just want to point out that this application section is more heavily weighted than the other sections, so you're going to want to pay close attention to this. So to qualify as innovative for this particular application, your project idea should be new to the district, or it can be a unique approach to an existing program that's already used by the district. So you really want to think about what value does this project bring to the district or to your school. In the application, the language you will encounter says, explain how the idea or concept or project is a new application for the district or applies an existing method application in a unique way that enhances classroom instruction and or supports students. And I just want to point out that if you are applying for an extension of an existing project, but it's not a unique take on the project that's already been in existence, that does not qualify as innovative. So let's look at a less than ideal response, and it reads, having an outdoor learning area is new for our school. Other schools in our district may or may not have outdoor learning spaces. So although the writer here has identified that this project may be new for the school, the fact that the district may already have existing outdoor learning spaces makes me wonder, well, are there other things that could be learned from these other projects? Maybe this project should be different from the other projects that exist. We really want to focus on innovative. So this would be the more ideal response here. Currently, our district has 2 schools with outdoor learning spaces. These spaces are used intermittently by the teachers and do not have a clear-cut purpose with regards to student learning. The project proposed in this grant uniquely explores the impact of outdoor learning experiences on the symptoms of anxiety and ADHD in students, as well as student engagement. This is a new project for our district and will provide us with valuable information about the benefits and or drawbacks to having these outdoor learning spaces available to our teachers and students. So you'll notice here the writer really proved that this was an innovative take on maybe an existing idea, which was the outdoor learning space. Okay, so now it's your turn to write to the innovation section of this application. The language you're going to be writing to is explain how the idea or concept or project is a new application for the district or applies an existing method or application in a unique way that enhances classroom instruction and or supports students. So you can go ahead and take a minute to pause the video and work on the innovation section of your application. Okay, so now we're going to work on section 4 of the application, which is potential impact. This section actually could be easily blended into your implementation section. What is being asked here is to estimate the number of students to be impacted and to describe the feasibility or intent to replicate this program idea across other classrooms or grades or schools within the district. So you can either add a couple of lines here to address this separately, or you can blend this into your implementation section response. So go ahead and pause the video and work on this. Section 5 is a very important section. Again, this one is more heavily weighted than other sections, so you're going to want to spend some extra time working in this section. Section 5 is about connecting to the vision of the foundation. I'm about to describe what the vision of the Forest Hills Foundation for Education is, and you're going to really want to concentrate on the language so that you can spend some time connecting this. So the vision of the Forest Hills Foundation for Education is to provide access to educational enrichment opportunities that ignite learning, improve educational outcomes, and prepare our students to be confident, competent, and engaged citizens. So you're going to want to spend some time examining your project and figuring out which of these terms you're really connecting to. Write to explain how your project helps to provide access to these sorts of enrichment opportunities for our students. So an example of a response that is perhaps not so ideal in the vision section is, by using an outdoor learning space, our students will be more confident and engaged learners. I hope to ignite learning in them by using this space. So although the applicant definitely tried to connect to our language, it's really unclear how the project creates confidence or how the project creates engagement or how the project ignites learning. So really try to articulate what about those terms you're connecting with and how the project helps to meet those. Here's an example of a more well-written response. I believe that student engagement will be positively impacted by using the outdoor learning space as a research space for students as well as a learning space. Hopefully, I will collect some concrete evidence proving this during the assessment of my project. I also believe that student learning will be ignited as the explorations we pursue will be driven by the students' own questions about the impact of this space on learning. Through the relationships built with the community volunteers and landscape architects during the design process, I hope to develop my students as citizens of our school district, which will one day ideally translate into them being more actively involved as adults in our community. So you can see that the writer here really talks about how student learning is going to be ignited, that students are going to be exploring their own questions, therefore igniting learning. And then also how they're going to become more engaged as citizens through the development of relationships built with the community volunteers through the design process. All right, so now it's your turn. You're going to be working on the connection to vision section of your grant application. Again, our mission is to provide educational enrichment opportunities that ignite learning, improve educational outcomes, and prepare our students to be confident, competent, engaged citizens. And remember, this section is weighted more than other sections, so you're going to really want to spend some time thinking about this as you write. The expected outcomes section, which is the 6th section, is another section where you can actually blend the answer to this section into another section. So actually, this really works well in the goals and objectives section of your application. You're being asked to clearly articulate the projected benefits for students at the completion of the project, which involves academic, artistic, and behavioral benefits. So you might be able to write just a sentence or two that actually helps you articulate what your expected outcomes are And you can do this in the goals and objectives section of your application, or you can do this in the expected outcomes section. So an example of a ideal goals and objectives section, you'll notice I didn't even make any changes here because it's really articulated how behaviors and academics can be impacted throughout this grant. So expected outcomes, a reduction in symptoms of anxiety and ADHD, and overall engagement being positively impacted. Okay, we are now moving on to section 7 of the application. This is the assessment section. And just like a lesson plan, your assessment section should describe how you're going to know whether or not you've met your objectives in the end. So you need to look back at your objectives section and make sure that you write an assessment that will allow you to measure whether or not your objectives have been accomplished. So the language you're going to write to is, how will you evaluate the successes and outcomes of the program or project? So this is an example of a less than ideal response for this section. To assess this project, I will see if my students are less anxious or hyper inside my classroom after they've used the outdoor classroom. So seeing if students are less anxious or less hyper leaves me with some questions. Has an assessment actually been defined? Is this involving interviews? Are students doing a survey? Is it teacher observations? We're not really looking for sort of vague generalities about what the impact is. What we want are some very clear specifics on how the objectives have been measured. And just reporting less anxious and reporting less hyper doesn't really provide us with that clear picture. So this would be an example of a more ideal response. To assess the impact of outdoor classroom use on my students' anxiousness and attentiveness, both students with and without diagnoses, I will use two different instruments, the Spence Children's Anxiety Scale and the University of Massachusetts ADHD Symptom Scale Self-Report. So you can take a minute to read the next two slides. You'll notice in this particular case, the writer used something that could be quantitatively described, but just because this assessment is quantitative does not mean all assessments need to be quantitative. You are welcome to use other sorts of qualitative reports, describing surveys, interviews, observations. All of these things can work as assessments. They just need to be articulated. So go ahead and take a minute to read the next two slides. And the second slide. You'll notice that the writer clearly articulated the three assessments that would be used for the project, and it will help provide us with the foundation, the knowledge of what the true impact was on students looking at those three assessments. All right, so now it's your turn. Take a few minutes to go ahead and pause the video and draft your assessment section for the application. The language you're going to be writing to is, how will you evaluate the successes and outcomes of the program and project? So go ahead and pause the video and write this section. So we have two sections left of the grant application. This section is on sustainability. Sustainability is whether or not your grant project is going to be able to continue past the initial award. Oftentimes grants request consumable materials or licenses, and those things wouldn't be able to continue without additional funding. By securing partnerships with your school or PTA or the community or parents, you will be able to demonstrate that your grant project can continue past this initial award. The foundation does consider multi-year projects, however, each phase needs to have a new innovation tied to it, and applications have to be submitted yearly to continue with the multi-year project. So the application reads, address the plan for sustaining the project beyond the grant year with or without additional funding. Additional funding could include district funds, building funds, PTA, boosters, community partners, additional funds from the foundation, etc. So this would be an example of a not ideal response. After the project is complete, I will need $500 every year to replenish the mulch in the outdoor learning space and to replace any damaged lumber. I will write a grant to obtain this money. So in this particular case, as a foundation, we're thinking about the responsibility that's being placed on us to continue to maintain the project. when in fact we're looking for teachers to be able to maintain the project. So this would be an example of a more ideal response. Working with our PTA and parents, I will ask for mulch donations yearly to maintain the outdoor learning space. Home Depot has also been an active supporter in local school garden projects, so I intend to apply for additional funding to improve the learning space if it becomes necessary over time. So you'll notice here the teacher has taken the opportunity to build those relationships to be able to continue the work of the grant beyond the initial award. So now it's your turn. Take a few minutes to write to explain how you're going to sustain the grant beyond the initial award. The language you're going to be writing to is address the plan for sustaining the project beyond the grant year with or without additional funding. And I do want to point out that not all projects require additional funding to continue. Sometimes you're just purchasing curriculum or materials that can be reused from year to year with future classes. So if you do not need any additional support to be able to sustain the project work over time, just simply indicate that in this application. Okay, we're on to the last section of the grant application. You're almost finished. Section 9 is the project budget. In your budget, you're going to be giving an explicit description of the materials that you're requesting and the number that is needed of each with prices and totals. We are not looking for generalized estimates in this section of the budget. In the application, it says, please detail how the money will be spent, include materials and equipment needed, supplier fees, travel costs, training fees, and or any stipends compensation for staff. If staff compensation is included, please show estimate of the number of staff hours. So here's an example of a not ideal budget section for an application. This person has included everything in just one line item and has given sort of a generalized number. And we're not entirely sure exactly how much wood is being purchased, what kind. We really want to know exactly how the money is going to be spent. Here's an example of a more ideal budget section. All right, so now it's your turn to take a few minutes and draft the budget section of your application. Congratulations, you have finished writing your grant application for the Forest Hills Foundation for Education. You are almost ready to turn that in for review. Just a couple of last notes before you submit. Definitely read over what you have written multiple times before you submit the application. Make sure you read each of your responses in the context of the section descriptions, and make sure that you've addressed each of those section requirements. Ask yourself if your objectives are clearly linked to your methods and to your assessment. Make sure you've made a case for why this funding is needed. Have you really persuaded us that this is a really important project to fund? Make sure you are proving to the organization that the money is going to be well spent and that you have thoughtfully designed this project and been responsible with how the dollars will be spent. And finally, check your response for spelling, grammar, and punctuation mistakes. Just a reminder, Forest Hills teachers, that first round grant applications are open until August 11th, and you can visit our website for the application itself. Congratulations on finishing your application, and we look forward to reading it. Have a wonderful day.